Hello, welcome back to the What Problem Are You Solving podcast, right? The greatest lean startup, entrepreneur AI podcast out there. So we have a light panel this week. It's just myself for now. Maybe Adam will show up. Ty is out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and I'm joined with a very special guest, one that I had the pleasure of meeting in person, Noelle Russel from the AI Leadership Institute. Hi and hello. How are you?
Hi, great to be here. Yeah, I'm kind of glad to filling in for like two other people. So
Yes, you do carry the
small
weight.
shoes to fill,
Yes,
but I'm sure we'll do okay.
you'll do fantastic, I'm sure. So good, yeah. You want to give us like a 4 sentence bio?
Yeah. Oh goodness.
Little, yeah.
Yes, I will do my best.
Okay.
I tend to have very long sentences. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm super excited to be here. Yes,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, AI Leadership Institute. That's kind of my day job, but I usually like to give people a little bit of context to why I do what I do. My journey into the world of technology. Okay, and it goes a bit far back, but at least into the world of AI started 10 years ago. I got invited to join a brand new team at Amazon Alexa. I was a cloud architect at the time. And Alexa was just being born. So if you know this device, oh yeah, mine's muted, so it won't be. So hopefully I will not trigger any of your devices if you have one nearby. But I got to join that team in its infancy. I got to become, I think I was employee 10 on the skills team. I built over 100 applications in its first year. And it kind of set me on this trajectory of like working with artificial intelligence before people were really asking about it. And I went from there to Microsoft, helped launch a bunch of models there as a principal program manager, the glue that holds it all together, so to speak. And that's why when I heard about this podcast that you do, I was like, oh, this is like what I care about the most. How do we, how do we help organizations kind of glue the technology to the business problem in a meaningful way? And in 2016, I ended up formally launching my organization, the AI Leadership Institute, to do a lot more executive and board level education. But now I always say I go from the boardroom to the whiteboard to the keyboard. So, and now even the chalkboard. So I try to hit all levels, and I really practice a learning by doing style. And we'll probably talk a little bit about some of that stuff this week.
That's awesome. That's super cool. Yeah. Yeah, you've had a wild history. I mean, again, anyone who wants to who follow your LinkedIn can certainly see the history that you've had there. And so while I bring up our other host who decided to slide in like we thought he would, the question for you, Noelle, what problem are you solving this week?
Yes, my favorite question. The problem I am solving this week in particular is that I'm helping a bunch of start like entrepreneurs, professionals in transition apply what they know about artificial intelligence to a real problem. And that real problem, I decided I really want people to like help small businesses, and I mean businesses under 10 million in revenue. And so if you're not at 10 million in revenue, first thing I do is say, well, how are you collecting leads and how are you closing sales? And if you're in AI, one of the best ways to solve for that, or at least to amplify your team, either as a solopreneur or as an entrepreneur with a small staff, is through building a conversational app. And so that's the problem I solved for a bunch of people this week. And it was a lot of fun turning on this light bulb because it's all no code. Like we didn't have to write one line of code, and we deployed production level conversational applications that not only navigated through the content of a website and told you what the hours were, but also collected lead information, collected enough information about those leads so that when you actually do get on a call with them, you know how to close them. And that's stuff that can be hard and certainly intimidating, so depending on where you are in the maturity curve of your organization. But everyone kind of struggles with sales from my perspective. And so if we can use AI to kind of take some of the heavy lifting of that conversation away, I think we find it much more enjoyable.
That's awesome. That's super cool.
Super fun.
Adam, welcome to the show. What problem are you solving this week, Adam?
Well, I set myself up good for. So the first problem I'm trying to solve is, that watch that I don't have. If someone wants to get me, I grew up, I always knew how to get myself into trouble, but I used my charm to get myself out. So I apologize. Okay, so I'm
glad you're here.
Good thing you're good looking, Adam.
Why did well, that was the second problem. Now that it was in a rush, I found a bad spot in the house, so I'm gonna have to quietly move out of this spot when Noelle takes the floor again. All right, I'm back on the the customer discovery problem, but I'm getting more specific about which problem within customer discovery. Is it the picking of one segment, the finding of that segment, the asking of good non-biased questions, or the analysis piece? So I'm trying to solve the analysis piece, but you need people to pick one, to find them, and to actually ask good questions before you can solve the analysis piece. So
That is
that's what I'm
true.
working.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to go navigate through your household and find another
All right,
spot, we'll be here.
all right,
Just,
I'll be right.
just slide back in. Yeah. As for me, actually, I have an interesting one because I was on an innovation pilot in my organization that I work for, and we were trying to set up some retrieval augmented generation, right? So we tried to set up a RAG database with some AI, and we finally got it up and running. So like today, I was able to start kicking the tires on something.
Nice.
Specifically, the problem we were trying to solve was we have a lot of complex purchasing rules, like hundreds of documents of, if you're trying to buy this much, you have to go through these regulations. If you're trying to buy this type of work, you have to go through this process. And you have to be a genius or to figure it all out, right? And so we said, what if we could just dump all of these policies, these rules, these PDFs into a vector database and then start querying it? And so I was able to actually play with it together in one place. So I could just sit there and say, hey, I'm trying to build a contract that has that's about $2 million for a year and a half's worth of work. We don't know what the deliverable looks like. What do you recommend, and which policies should we follow? And it's like it's querying, it's talking to the policy, which is beautiful. And it's spitting back, well, you need to think of it structured this way. This is probably the best way to do this first, do this second. This follows this regulation, this follows this law. And it's beautiful so far. A lot more fun to play with it. So now the problem I'm trying to solve is like, now what? It's the joy of having a new toy to play with in AI.
Very cool.
So yeah, we wanted to just talk a little bit about when you and I actually spoke at a conference a couple months ago. We were on an AI panel, and it was a little broad. It was AI in government, but it was left kind of to our own expertise to kind of shape the conversation. And I think that you and I had similar and yet different types of approaches and everything. And so, I guess to kind of kick things off with the AI Leadership Institute, I'm really glad you're taking this leadership angle, because we've kind of joked early on where AI was just kind of bolted onto everything, and it really wasn't innovative. It was just, it was just doing API calls, right, to ChatGPT, right, back in the early days. But now now we are starting to get some true innovation, some different multimodal types of tools out there. How does the human get involved in this too, right? So how do you free the human? How do you free the leaders to encourage innovation?
Yeah, I have ended up in some very interesting rooms that I did not expect. Like the first 10 years when I first got involved in Alexa, I went on a world tour talking about a voice-enabled world, right? Jeff Bezos's mission was voice will be everywhere. And what he meant was AI will be everywhere. You could just talk to your tech. It'll be frictionless. And we all know the early days of Alexa was all but frictionless. But that was the dream. And everywhere I went, I would demonstrate this technology. And most people in the room, when I'd say, hey, does anyone know what Alexa is? Most people would be like, oh, we haven't bought one yet. Now, 500 million devices later, it's a household name. People know what it is. But it's interesting, not until this time, this kind of chat GPT moment, do people now kind of put the two together, that talking to an Alexa or a Siri or a Google Assistant, that was an AI, like an AI problem that you were solving in the same way that you would use ChatGPT today. It's actually easier, in my opinion,
right. Mm-hmm.
to just talk as opposed to figure out like what words to type. And so I think it's interesting right now to watch this progression. I do think, though, one of the biggest challenges I have, and I've had this since the earliest days, is that when I go into the world and I start telling developers, hey, you can build anything with this tech. Like, wouldn't it be great if your machines could talk to each other in natural language? Meaning that if one system is using a certain, JSON format and the other system needs it in some government regulated XML format, that you could just say, here's what I have. Could you take it and turn it into what you need? And enterprise integration, right? From like 15 years ago, like this all
You know,
become
you're
like,
putting like thousands of systems engineers out of work. You know that, right?
no. There's many new problems they can solve and that
It's
they
not a bad
prefer to solve. Like data integration is the last thing I like to do when I'm like building a system. I'm like, it's like the bane of my existence, honestly. I'm like, really? Am I really going to build a schema map for this? Like, there's got to be an app for this. And there isn't, but there could be. But the challenge is I would tell, hey, you can build anything. You can build these systems. And what would end up happening is people would build these single use cases. Like on Alexa, they build fact skills, which is very similar to like RAG. It's like they build the ability to ask a question and get a good answer. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, but I mean, I get it. Yeah, so yeah, we do want that answer, but like you could do anything. You could analyze sales reports. You could find out your best market. You could personalize a campaign. And you want to know like the facts about a dog or a cat or banana. Like it was mind numbing. And it was the developer. Like it was like they were afraid to do anything outside of what we scripted for them. And that was like my first real awakening was that if somebody tells you, here's what you can build with this, usually, at least in my experience, you're going to build that thing and you're not really going to think much more deeply about it. You're not going to go and think, wow, could I actually re-architect this system completely in a fraction of the time and make it better, faster, and make more money than it did before? So what I'm worried about now is that we've come out of the gate, like you said, with ChatGPT. We've come out of the gate again with this use case driven single thing we're going to do with it. Even RAG, like I want to use it to find an answer for something, no matter how complex the answer is, when actually it's a platform of communication between humans and machines. So we don't just have to talk about facts. We could talk
Right.
about, we could ask it to reason. We could ask it to design. I mean, one of my favorite tasks is I have it design my firewall rules, which I don't know much about. Like I'm a systems person. I grew up building cloud architectures. I get firewalls. I know why they're there. I could configure one, but to be able to talk to a system that can understand hundreds of thousands of them and then grade me on what I did and then give me suggestions, like, and then I could automate all of that and just say, hey, when you build a firewall, build it as if we did all this conversation. Like have that
like it.
by yourself.
Mhm.
I don't think we're there yet. Like I think we have the technology, but to your point on the leadership side, like humans actually have to be willing to think outside the box. And that's why I do think, and I was just talking to a huge company today, the reason they're worried about small companies, entrepreneurs, fintech, martech, like these smaller companies going into spaces is because they have the willingness to think
No
reinvention
bureaucracy.
style.
Yep.
Yes. Like I'm just going to redo this whole thing and do it like no one's ever done before. And AI, like it's kind of like what they say, like the brave is rewarded, right? Or there's some saying like that. But it's basically you're going to get rewarded if you're that kind of company, and big monolithic companies are going to struggle in this new world. But let's face it, if you're a big company employee becoming a small company owner and you bring that nonsense with you, you won't survive. And we're in that beautiful moment when thousands of companies are starting. And in about 2 to 3 years, it's going to, just like what happened 10 years ago, it's going to collapse and there'll be like 20 companies standing. So how do you become a company that's standing? And I do think it's what you said. It's this reinvention mindset. All right, chew on that. What do you think?
You sort of answered my question. My first question was going to be how do you get people to think outside the box? Like when you were saying something about building that thing, and maybe I don't want to lead the witness, like is your answer that it's startups, or is it not giving instructions, or is it open innovation, or is it community, or is it hack? Like, so that was my first kind of reaction. And you kind of answered the question before I even got a chance to.
Yes. And I do believe
John said you were going to be a great guest. So
yeah,
it's already.
Well, I don't want to answer all my questions before I get a chance to let you ask them, but I do. I mean, that's why I started the AI Leadership Institute. Started in 2016 when I realized a bunch of executives were asking questions, and the classic answer was, "Here's a PowerPoint deck that leads to a service that we deliver in a very traditional way." And they wanted us, and I think the audience here would appreciate they wanted to be shown instead of told. And that was my philosophy, is I want to show versus tell. I want to be a doer, not a talker. And in the sales process, that is so unique right now. Like, the one thing you can do to differentiate yourself is just show what you can do instead of tell them what you can do. And I mean, all the big companies, like their field organizations, are going to struggle because they're not doers, they're talkers. So I feel like this is another opportunity for organizations. But of course, the devil in those details is communication skills. And that's kind of a slippery little like skill set that you're going to need, because not only will it, of course, help you have better conversations with humans, but it actually drives your efficiency with AI models today. Like, the more clarity of thought you have with a model, the better your model will be. Fun fact, most people, specifically engineers, not super clear in the way that they think or talk or write. So
I'm a recovering engineer, so yes,
yeah,
you're not wrong.
So you can relate, right?
So this is maybe the time I bring up. We might have a new listener, from my daughter's soccer team. We were having that exact conversation. So one of the moms was working with a bunch of engineers, and we were having this exact conversation about when is AI appropriate, and it doesn't matter how the engineers think or what they're building or how smart it is if no one's using it the way it was being intended for. So maybe this is a good time to have that conversation. The other thing, since I did want to force that in at some point, so that was a little bit but I had a window. I guess the other thing that was naturally following the last conversation. So startups are more willing to think outside the box. They're also more susceptible to just throwing AI, like not really understanding and just using AI to please investors or to kind of as a buzzword.
It's flashy. Yeah.
So where's that balance? Because the big companies also are less likely, but they have all the data. They have,
yeah, but do you have AI? That's the real question.
Right. So
yeah,
where's that balance?
I had a conversation about this same person today about this concept of, like, yes, big companies, they have a lot of data. They even have data scientists. What their gap often is a person who can translate between the two. So big of a gap, in fact, that like Indeed has created this job called an analytics translator. And if you look and read the description, and I was shocked when someone brought it to my attention, but when you read the description, it literally is like, in my mind, it's kind of like a agile technical program manager is what it reads like. But it's basically someone who understands enough about the engineering to manage that work, but then has not just enough understanding, but enough trust and like communication abilities to actually sit as a trusted advisor to the business. So you have to, it's a relatively senior role, because you want to sit in the room with the executives that are like, this is the dream we have for AI. And you have to be the one who says, I'm not going to write a check my engineering team can't cash. And that's hard. Most people can't. Like, the sales team will oversell. The engineering team will get bitter and be like, I hate the sales team. And at the end of the day, we don't even serve our customers well, because we end up building something that's not closely aligned with what they asked for anyway. So I think there is this big learning curve. And that's why I always say, like, executives kind of have to, and I say executives, but I really mean anyone who's not a first line, like managing work.
Yeah, hands on keyboard, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like, if you are leading the organization, the business, the team, intrapreneur or entrepreneur, like, your job really needs to shift to, how do I understand this technology enough, and how do I understand the business enough to tie these two things together? And what that means is that the most successful thing you can do, I mean, at least from my experience, and last year I did 30 projects, 30 different generative AI projects, because like you said, it was flashy and everyone's like, we need this. And I'm like, are you sure? I don't think you do, but okay. I'll build you something. So we built all these projects, but the one thing that all the ones that made it to production had in common was the clarity of success metric. Like, what are they going to use to measure the success of their project? And it doesn't have to even be financial. Like, it doesn't have to be a return on investment, but it has to be. The easiest one is time. Just measure how much time do you spend doing that thing right now, and then how many, how much do you pay those people per hour? And now if I add AI to it and I can reduce it, there's a tangible dollar amount. And almost always, especially with Gen AI, because it's cheap-ish, I can almost always return 3 to 5x on whatever that investment was, 50 grand, 150 grand, doesn't even matter.
So I'm really glad you went there, because as we were talking, I think that's another thing that we like to talk about in our terms. Like when we are trying to solve a problem for someone, we're either reducing a pain or creating a gain for them. And the application of AI at first, we're like, okay, it was great and all, but it didn't really create a gain. It may have solved a pain at first. Like I can do something faster, cheaper, easier, right? Less stress, less friction, like you talked about. But then we all have that time where we started playing with the tool and we had this aha moment. We're like, oh my gosh, like the oh my gosh moment. That's creating a gain. That's beyond just, can I do my normal job faster, or can I do it in fewer steps, fewer clicks? No,
Right.
I think the real game changers, because another thing that hangs in the back of my head as I'm talking through this is 97% of startups fail, right? And
Right.
that's not going to change any more or less with AI, because now everyone's got an AI startup, right? There's like estimated 64,000 or some odd AI startups right now out there. We know, like you said, there's going to be a market leveling of those. And so I think the ones that are going to survive are the ones that are actually going to be more innovative in doing less pain solving and more gain creating, like creating those oh wow moments for whatever industry they're in.
100%. Yeah. And I
Hmm.
always look like that's the emotion that I'm looking for at the end of like an executive briefing, right? You
Yes,
take them from, and I mean, these
skeptical, right?
rooms that I've been in is like I was at the Dairy Farmers of America, right? I was talking to dairy farmers about how AI is going to change their industry, or talking to electricians, or even more abstract, like electronics distributors. So they're not even like they don't do the thing, they just distribute the thing, but a very rich like ecosystem of people are involved in electronics distribution. Oh my gosh. And sealant and adhesives, I had no idea, but they talked about everything from like diapers to, the tape we use to stick those little hook things on, like all sorts of things. And all of them had very different use cases for AI. But all of them were afraid, like they're all perceived laggards in the world of technology. Like if you talk to people who've been there 20 years, they're like, oh yeah, we're always the last to adopt. And one thing I've noticed now is that when positioned in the right way, they are actually the quickest or most effective at adopting, because they are willing to scope it down to a very small thing. I call it a minimum remarkable product, like the one thing that they think would be cool to test to see if it does return value. Most companies that are on the other side, not these like laggards, the pioneers, are the boil the ocean people. They're
Try to
like,
do everything for
yeah, let's
everybody.
do
Yeah.
19 use cases. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I know you want to, but like, let's really just do one. And they're like, but one? Who needs one? And I'm like, but one turns it in, and it's a struggle. Like it's a struggle to have that conversation. But the value is obvious at the end. The small ones make it to production, the big ones fail in this like analysis paralysis of all the things that they would try to do with zero way to measure whether the thing they were trying to do was successful or not. And I think all of that stems from good leadership, right? Somebody has to own the train. Like, yes, we're going, no, we're not, or we're going and now we need to stop. Like somebody has to be in charge. And that's why I think the new regulation that, well, it's not new anymore, I guess, but like the executive order, we talked a little bit about that at the government summit we were at. But the executive order, the first thing they just said was, hey, every federal agency has to have a chief AI officer. And of course, all of us AI people were like, there's not enough chief AI officers in the world. But they didn't really mean like in a traditional sense. Like
Right.
they just meant someone needs to own this, be
Someone needs to be accountable.
fully responsible.
Exactly.
Jeff
It's not
Bezos,
other duties as assigned.
yeah,
Exactly.
Jeff Bezos called it a single threaded owner. Like you need a single threaded, single throat to choke when all heck breaks loose.
I love that phrase. Some
Yeah,
people
it's
don't like it.
terrible.
It's evocative. Yes.
Yes, yes, it is evocative for sure. But
So,
yeah, and I agree with it 100%. What's up, Stephen? Stephen Pullum's in the house.
so Stephen jumps in and says, I think that the greatest impact of AI is not the product, but the implementation, distribution, and equitable governance in respect to the common person or STEM students. That is, who the impact is going to affect the greatest, because it will involve lifestyle and workforce changes. What say you?
Yeah, of course. Steven and I, well, we don't go way back, but we are friends. He's in my community and we talk a lot, but he has experience in a much different part. We haven't talked about this. It's actually leading a little bit into what we were going to talk about around responsible use and kind of finding it. But I
Here we
think
are. Let's go.
yeah, I think there's a
Mhm.
really big opportunity, like when we're thinking about impact for this technology, we're right now kind of hovering in the area of people in the know, which is like less than 1% of
Yeah.
1% of
It's
like the world.
it's the nerds.
And
Yes.
yeah, and we tend to, when we're in this bubble, we tend to think everyone thinks like this. And Stephen is actually in a different part of the country, a different part of the world, but also has a company called Afra Security, which is like African security. Anyways, a cybersecurity expert. And I
Nice.
realized, like, same with AI and cyber is the same. Like, there are parts of the world that still need this information, but some parts of the world don't even have a stable internet connection. And
Mhm.
we're talking about everyone has AI and everyone has been building RAG architectures. I mean, I heard Microsoft say that. Like, everyone's been building RAG. I'm like, well, not everyone. I mean,
Not everyone.
every one of us, like in our little group.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important that we realize the impact AI can have might not, and I always say this, it's not the sexiest use case that you're going to come up with in this boardroom. Like, it's going to be the use case that allows you to attract the most customers, open your funnel the widest. And
Mhm.
that thing that does that action is probably going to be relatively insignificant when you think about the name of it. Like, it might be a customer service application. It might be, a digitization of forms in a dentist
Mhm.
office. Like,
Mhm.
these are not life changing. Oh my gosh, you just changed the formula for Coca-Cola. This
Right.
is, we just automated something that would have taken 4 more employees that we don't have the money to hire right now.
Mhm.
So we can't grow. And now that company that couldn't grow before all of a sudden survives another two
Right.
quarters
It's
until
a
they,
leveler. It
yeah,
actually, the
equalizer.
it's an
Yes,
equalizer.
100%.
Exactly. Mhm.
So that's a good segue, and as much as you can share, but don't share anything you're not on the dairy industry or the
Oh, yeah.
give us some examples or some
Oh
stories
my
that
gosh,
you're
so
allowed to
good.
share. And
Yeah, so my favorite one from the dairy farmers, which will maybe for some people will be like, I mean, I have zero green thumbs. So I bought one of those garden, it's like GARDYN 3.0 during Black Friday last year. So it's like a hydroponic garden. You give everything it needs at once. And then every so often I get a ping on my watch that says you need to add water. But it works and it grows and we have fresh vegetables. And if the apocalypse does come, we're like good to go for a little bit until I can't plug it into electricity. But I haven't thought about that. But this so those who are green thumbs might be like, oh my gosh, of course you would do that. But one of the things that they've been working on for years is crop protection. And dairy farming, like it's an ecosystem, right? So there's feed that has to be fed to the cows. We are now driving 2 different ecosystems, organic and non-organic. So these farmers have this huge swath of like protection that they need to do to their crops at different levels. And there's things that they can and cannot do to different types of crops that they can and cannot feed to certain types of animals, which is like complicated in my mind. I was like, holy mom, I didn't really think about, like, if you're an organization that sells organic milk, what that changes in an ecosystem that does not exist, right? I mean, it's better now, but even then it's super immature compared to the other dairy farmers. So that being said, they ended up creating, so they always had greenhouses, but it would take them an entire harvest season, right, to simulate what would happen in that greenhouse to a crop if you used a certain type of pesticide or a certain type of soil additive or a certain type of acidity balancer. So they would have to wait because they'd have to wait for the thing to grow and be like, oh yeah, it didn't really work out.
One big
They,
experiment. Mhm.
yeah, they were using computer vision. So that's cool. So they could collect all this data over years and then use computer vision to detect anomalies and patterns much faster. The challenge was in the collection. It was seasonal. So it would take you 10 years to get a very good like pattern identified. So the benefit now is that they can do much smaller crops and they can accelerate the speed of production. They can also see at the microbe level the impact of these agents, so that now they can tell within 6 weeks the end-to-end life impact of a additive to a crop over time, and they don't have to wait 6 months or 2 years. They can do it in 6 weeks, or worst case 4 months. And that was like, and they showed Winfield United is one of the largest dairy farmer organizations. They have a video on their website you can go take a look at, but it shows how they're using computer vision now to monitor these crops from seeding all the way through to, a certain height, 4 inches, I think. But they were able to gather enough predictive information from that. And now they use a generative model in an app that can be said to a farmer who knows nothing about this stuff, right? They have zero technical skills specific to that. They have plenty of technical skills with like farm tractors and stuff, but they don't know how to use AI. Most of them don't even have, a computer, but they do have smartphones. And so these smartphones can tell them, hey, right now, based on weather conditions, dryness of the soil, based on sensors that are in the farm equipment, as well as in, so one of the sensors that I thought was fascinating was tread sensors. So the tread sensors on the tires of the tread will detect how soluble the dirt is. So how much it's accepting water. Like, it's so fascinating. Smart. But like with all things, there's.
I thought you were going to say that the cows were all wearing GoPros with their.
Yeah.
I thought could work.
I think it's awesome. I mean, you can't unsee some of that.
Animal intelligence. AI.
Yeah, you might suffer some trauma watching the footage. But there's AI for that too. But yeah, so these are some of the things that they're like, all these are individual AI use cases. But I think what I found is the most valuable thing is like, you have to have a reason you're doing all that stuff. And in their case, the reason was, how do we create crops that can survive no matter what happens with water or air?
So you're saying you should know what problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's put that in big bold letters. And how to measure whether you're solving it successfully.
Well, I think on the measurement side, the only other thing I had sort of queued up and forced in is, my kids, as they just walked in, are into Mark Rober explaining things simply. So he used AI to steal signs, but it was really about pattern recognition. And I feel like that simulation of sort of the cause and effect at when you were talking about the microbe level, I think that idea of like, not just speeding it up, but being able to pick the patterns and like what is actually correlated versus what is noise. It seems like that's one of the actual use cases.
And I do think from a leadership perspective, like, it takes a business domain expert to provide that guidance to a model, especially certainly a large language model or a large model. Like, not all models are language models. So computer vision models, for example, are also very large pre-trained models. No, today you're not feeding a blank model 200 million images of the world. Like right now, we have models that already know what that world looks like. We just need to train it on what's important to us. So if I go in and I'm a produce, I tend to be in the farming world, but I think it's fascinating. But if I'm going to do produce, right, I want to know, by taking a picture of an orange, I want to know where it is on its maturity curve. So if it's more expired than others, I'm going to put it on the truck that's going to the shop down the street, as opposed to getting on a truck that'll get on a plane that's going to, Seattle, across the country. And those are happening now. I remember talking to one of the largest growers of produce in Chile, and he said to me, he's like, do whatever you want, but don't touch my line. That's what he said. He's like, I'll let you come in here and play with this stuff, but don't touch my line. In other words, don't come in here and break anything. Don't stop anything, but you can watch all you want. And the right leader in that role, that's all we need to do is watch. To your point, Adam, on like, we just need enough data to then be able to build the model. So I can just watch. I don't have to touch anything. But so many people are like bulls in China shops with this AI stuff. They come in and they're like, right, you need to have all your data ducks in a row and you need to have your cloud infrastructure redone. I'm like, actually, you don't. Like, you could just watch the way and this is true when you get a new job. People don't do that. They don't come in and watch. They come in and fruit basket turn over everything.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's right.
Come on. It's
right.
Pretty.
Last question.
Yeah. Or maybe not.
For a little bit. No, All right. So how do you make the distinction between sort of just a super fancy algorithm? Like when you're talking about the line, what's the difference for those like me, admittedly, who are not as smart as the two of you on this, like a super fancy algorithm versus machine learning, like, and versus AI. So let's go back. I was meant to ask that at the beginning, but obviously I was a little flustered. I was a little late. Like computer vision was able, there's the, I didn't hear about this on the line, but obviously recycling, there's something that can sort of just look, that's a plastic bottle, that gets dinged, that can be recycled. So it was just taking pictures of stuff with a laser and then not, so those people were off the line, right? It was 100%. And I think that companies, or maybe there's a couple of those companies, but like that to me is a super, real world use case, but that's not AI, right? That's not really AI. That's just computer vision with an algorithm.
I mean,
So,
but computer vision is AI.
right. Okay. So now,
Yeah. So kind
I set
of like,
myself up. So
yeah.
Give us the progression there.
Yes. So yes, because I think, if you go back far enough, I mean, AI is kind of like the word soda. It represents everything that's effervescent. So artificial intelligence is when you're using any of these models. There's a whole and I see Talisha's in the house too. So some of these people are taking my AI leadership class. So you'll hear me say it again because I preach this stuff all the time. What's up? And Talisha also is into cybersecurity. I love it. Thanks for coming, y'all. But one of the things that I have practiced, I think over the course of my, I don't know, let's call it 10 years, is that when you start using a technology, like I call everything as AI, I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. That's why people, when they take courses, it starts with AI for everyone. Because
it's a big umbrella. Everyone's welcome under it. Yes.
So let's say under that umbrella, and I actually do a whiteboard where I like draw a little umbrella, looks like a cupcake, but I try to draw an umbrella. And on one side is a data scientist who's going to craft an algorithm from scratch. Basically, they're going to create a mathematical equation that says, when you see something that looks like this, which means when you see all these pixels aligned in this way, I want you to call that a bottle. And I want you to then call this a chair and that a human. Now that work has already been done, but someone had to do that at first. Like that model had to be built. So that's what we call kind of the most traditional, old school, like build a model from scratch. Custom AI, you could call it, right? You're building a custom model for your use. Then, so now we've got all these models. As people build them, we realize they're reusable. So enter Scikit-learn, right? Which is a learning platform. Anyone can go, you could just type it in SCIKIT, learn, like to learn something. And these are packages of pre-built models. They don't work yet. They're just mathematical equations we know work in certain circumstances. Your job as a data scientist is to take one of those models and apply data. And this is where AI comes in. So there's a few different types. One is like supervised learning, my personal favorite because I'm the most involved, not a fave for people who don't want to be involved. But I like this one because my job is to identify a data set that's going to say, okay, mathematical model, in order for you to make this decision, here's good data that represents a good decision. Here's bad data that represents a bad decision. Here's some random data over here that once you think you know what you're doing, I'm going to throw this data at you and see how well you do. And then I'm going to go and realize, oops, you made a mistake here and a mistake there. And I'm going to go and add new data to train you more.
So every time you filled out one of those captchas of like, click on the bicycles in the Google Photos, then you're actually training hard, like supervising.
And that's the benefit of it, is that it was like at scale, people were supervising models and they didn't even know they were doing it at the time. And that's brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. And I don't know, there's ethics in there.
How much does correcting it versus feeding it new data play a role in fixing the model? Like,
it does depend on the model. So as we move into like unsupervised models, which is where we're in more unsupervised territory when we get into large language models like ChatGPT, but unsupervised models are now looking at data and they're making their own decision based on the patterns they find in the data. And that is better because I don't have to be there to be like, this is good, this is bad. It looks and goes, okay, I see that all of the decisions were on, like, they basically scatter plot, right? All of the answers, and they see 94% of them are on this side of the line, 2% are on this side of the line, or 6% or whatever, a bunch are scattered in the middle. So it knows when it sees data that looks like the masses, it's going to make a decision in that direction. However, to your point on training, now comes this new concept called reinforcement learning, that I need to now reward this model when it makes a good choice, because I'm not giving it data. I'm not training it specifically on a supervised data set. I'm just going to say, when you make a good choice, I'm going to give you a reward. And when you make a bad choice, I'm going to punish you. It looks a little different mathematically, but that's basically what you're doing is you're saying, if you do good, I'm going to allow you to continue make those decisions. If you do bad, I'm going to take those decisions away. And so the model starts to learn. But the way that this has shown up now in large language models that have abstracted this technology, which is it's still unsupervised, but now we're looking at neural networks, right? Which are basically layers and layers of these model decisions. But the easiest way to think about it is when you look at a model, if you're using ChatGPT or Gemini, most of them have this thumbs up, thumbs down thing that they present to you. This is the worst type of reinforcement learning because it's binary. It's basically saying, is your answer good or does it suck?
And nowhere in between.
Yes. Yeah. And usually it's a Likert scale, right? You're like, well, it was kind of good, but it could be better. And so what you'll see in the beta versions of most models, and this is if you are an engineer or you're a company and you're getting into AI, like do this in beta. Make sure you develop a scale so that you can capture very refining data from people using it that go, I like what you did there, but you didn't quite get it right on this piece. And if you see some of these models in beta, you'll see they have thumbs up, thumbs down, or they have a Likert scale. And then under it, it'll give you a text box to explain your thing. Here's the catch. Nobody does that unless they are incented to do that. Yeah. So be aware that I always tell people, like, building a good model is expensive, but not in the way people think. Like, yes, a little in the infrastructure and the model, but it's expensive because you have this ongoing human infused reinforcement learning that has to happen forever.
All the time.
All the time. And those people will not do it for free forever. And if they do it for free, it will be short-term and likely not super valuable.
So not only will AI take our jobs, we actually have to train them to do our jobs for us. So, that's
well, I will tell you that
catch-22.
AI will not thumbs up, thumbs down its own, model unless you tell it to.
Unless you hire an agent to do that for you. Yeah. Yeah. So actually you snuck in a couple words that I like, and I know it's your jam too, so I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about it, is responsible AI and ethical AI, right? Because again, we talked about those times where we have that aha moment when AI is actually freeing us from something and it's giving us, a different perspective than we weren't expecting, or surprised us in some way. However, right, we also know that there has been a ton of examples from all of the big AI companies so far. They're all tripping over their own feet as they, accelerate these innovations. And so they're going to make mistakes, very public ones. And yet, we have this new realm of making sure that we're actually being responsible as we do that. So, like, you care to elaborate on that, and like, where do you see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I want to thank Yuvika for commenting on our cool agricultural one. But Adam you wanted to know about the other one too. So I'm going to use this as in the context of kind of some more like adhesives, for example. Like, who knew? I was shocked at polymer AI, like how to dissect and reorganize polymers. This is fascinating. And I'm a physicist, like I'm a 9th grade physicist. So in 9th grade, I decided this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And unfortunately, due to the world that I live in, that was discouraged as I went through my academic career. But I love physics. And so when they started getting into kind of the physics and molecular biology and all this really cool stuff, but one of the things that they recognized is that when they started to use artificial intelligence, if they didn't do certain things, their models would what we call in the industry implode for a couple different reasons. And what that means is that they basically would, they'd blow up. They wouldn't be able to do the right thing. The data we saw this in the early days. You mentioned GPT 3.5. So like in 3.2, in these early days, we would ask a question and it would just like go off the rails. And you couldn't get it back. You'd have to reset the model. So with responsible AI, implosion is, and certainly in LLMs, it kind of gets more abstracted to human language level. But there are certain things when you build a model, when you build a solution with artificial intelligence, in order for people to ever use it, which by the way is called success. If someone actually uses your model, you are successful. Fit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Most adoption, just basic adoption, we can learn from the greats over at Google and Google Lens. Like, come on, like they're the kings of bad adoption patterns, but they came out with cool tech. And in, this organization kind of came up with this really cool tech to define a new way of designing adhesive, like collections of, it was like a protein folding exercise using
Cool.
quantum like physics. And so obviously when quantum gets figured out, like they're going to do well.
That's awesome.
However, the users in the room, though fascinated by the idea, were like, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. So responsible AI is our responsibility as someone building a system. Our job is not to stay in our little bubble of, hey, but you all are nodding along with me. You know what I'm saying. Like everyone knows what we're saying. It's to build transparency into our systems, meaning that anyone should be able to look over and go, I see what you're doing there. Now, the trick with that is that transparency, I don't know if you remember these like old desktops where you could get a glass on your gaming desktop and you could watch all this like processes inside your machine. Like putting glass on your AI model isn't enough, right? Like, and that's why when we think about responsible AI, it's not just, transparency. It's not just, can I see it? It's, can I understand it? But we have LLMs for that now. So you don't even have to worry too much. As long as you take what you've done, we have this new, or it's not new, I guess, maybe 2 years old, this concept known as model cards. Lots of people think that their model algorithm is like their secret sauce. These 64,000 startups are like, I built a model no one else will ever build. Stanford might beat you, but it's fine because they're academics and they're not going to sell anything. But in this world where I'm like, this is mine, and we understand you want to keep your bits to yourself. So instead, you're going to write these model cards. But what happened in the beginning is data scientists wrote these model cards. And if you handed them to a business owner, they'd be like, I have no idea what this means. These 14 hyperparameters, like, what does that even mean? But now I can hand that model card to a model and say, hey, I'm a CMO. Tell me what this model does. And it can translate those model cards, not just in Spanish and Portuguese, but also in CFO language, CMO language, like chief financial officers, marketing officers, security officers. They all talk different languages, like literally the Tower of Babel. But now, or is it Babylon? I don't know. Whatever Christian reference I'm trying to say. But it's basically everyone's talking a different language, but with these models, we can equalize, right? That concept. And so transparency and explainability are the number one things you should do. If you do nothing else, let people see what's happening inside. Again, you don't have to give your bits and bytes away,
Right.
but be clear about what you're doing and then create a mechanism for people to talk to your code. Like I love code bots that I can actually communicate to a Fortran code, or I could talk to a COBOL library that the person who wrote it is long gone, but now I can build an LLM that can read it and tell me what the functional requirements might have been to use that they would have used to build it. Like that was not possible 5 years ago. So I think this is where we start. The responsibility is that as a builder, my job is to make sure I build transparent and explainable solutions. And as a consumer, my job is to require that of my builders. And that is not well articulated. And of course, you had mentioned this earlier about bias, right? Like bias is a huge problem. And people, I've done a bunch of TikToks. I have like a million plus views on TikTok on my AI gone wrong stories. And I always talk about like the bad stuff because it attracts views.
Because it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fun. But one thing that people would they would consistently say, AI is whatever, is bad, is racist. And I was like, I mean, you do know that like we did that. Like we built that. Even in models that are
people created it. So
yeah, it came from our data, the internet's data. And so I try to remind people like the internet is what is being used to train these massive models. And while it's holistically relatively true from a human communication perspective, it does not represent the world. Like doesn't represent humanity. It doesn't represent truth. It just literally represents how do humans form sentences. And that's about it. And so we have mentioned a couple times kind of in jest that we're removing jobs, but the one job that will accelerate and more companies will need are those people who are going to be the guarders, the red teams, if you will, the AI red teams, right? Like the people that are going to ask the questions, how will this hurt someone? Is it fair? Is it accurate? It's just like what happened in Detroit. It was awful, but like not everyone became unemployed in Detroit. It went through a period of chemicalization, but now those people are still making cars and those people are just not the ones turning the screw on the line.
Right. Not doing it the same way.
They're not doing
Exactly.
it the same way. And they're doing different things, because when you elevate yourself as a human and you do higher value work, the
Yes.
work changes, and that's
Yes.
okay. But it is scary. So I'm empathy. I have empathy for
Mhm.
that. But it doesn't mean that those jobs, like that the humans are displaced. The work is changing. Do the
Mhm.
humans have to want to do the different work? Yeah. And guess what? We live in a country where some humans don't want to do work.
Yeah.
So we can't fault AI for that.
Right. But there's opportunities to upskill too, and that's the thing, right?
100%.
I've seen some things shared like on LinkedIn that's basically says, why don't you like get ahead of this like AI curve now before you're kind of legally mandated to
Yeah.
to take AI training, right? I mean, because
100%.
it is the trend of where things are going.
Yeah, and like the
Mhm.
EU just put in their EU act that passed, which means we will shortly be following it with our executive order mandates. But yeah, within 6 months, every employer is going to be required, and this is fascinating actually. Every employer is going to be required to train their people on AI. And I think it goes back to kind of what we were joking about, where AI is not going to take your job. Someone using AI
Someone
will take
using
your
AI.
job. But if you are an employer, and I
Yeah.
talked to a bunch of C-level executives last year, and their first immediate response was, oh, I could cut a bunch of people and save a bunch of money and be rich, and it'll be awesome. And what they
Wow.
almost immediately realized, Amazon was one of the first, and this was a decade ago, where they said, if we build a system that eliminates human workers, we have no customers. And that's the truth. If we create, if CEOs do not think that every person working for them is also part of an ecosystem that is their customer, and if they lay off 30% of their workers and replace it with AI, that AI will have zero people to serve, because we will have unemployment. Like, it'll be a societal impact. And people don't think about this until it shows up. But of course, unless you're an ethicist like myself, and you're always like, trolley exercise, like, do I hit my grandma or my dog?
That's hilarious.
Do we fire people and end the
Mhm.
world, or do we just like retrain them? So EU already got to that answer, right? They're like, if we don't retrain you, you will end up unemployed and you will be a tax on our society. And that is a secret thing that we all need to be. And that's kind of what Stephen was mentioning earlier in his comment. Like, how are we going to educate like people who are not the privileged,
Right.
engineering, technical people? How are we going to educate the teachers and the nurses and the farmers? Like, everyone has to get educated, because if they get left behind, they'll become unemployed. And that is not
Yeah.
a feasible solution.
And you and I have like a million kids between the two of us. So like, yes, absolutely. Like, our kids need to be hands-on in this stuff.
100%.
It is certainly the new world that they are growing up in. So they can't be, we can't shun that from them. We have to make sure that they know how to use it responsibly.
Yeah. And I think that's part of responsible AI, right? It's not just how you build stuff. Like, it's literally, I always tell people, it's like water in the wave. It's the way you think about the world moving forward. How are you going to build in a way that serves more people? How are you going to build in a way that is fair, that is just, that doesn't violate someone's privacy rights? Like, I'm watching companies like Meta actually budget infringement on laws that are currently in place. They're like, oh, darn, $400 million for like violating children's privacy on Instagram. That's awful. I shouldn't do that. Let's just make sure we've put in a line item in our budget to cover that expense when it happens. Like, that's the world we're in. And so I always say, we don't really need a better technology. We really need a better humanity.
Better humans.
Yeah, we need better humans. Yep.
Wow. Well, let's bring it home, Adam. Final thoughts on AI in general, or any of the topics we talked about in particular.
All right. In addition to hot dog, not hot dog.
Yes.
Sandwich. No.
I just saved that all the way back from the computer vision dairy.
Yes.
So
yes.
I was holding out to that one. I guess it would sort of, I'll go back to the startup side and just like invite, like, what do you do? Sort of like steroids in the, like, if everyone else is taking them, like, what do you do if it's not ethical? Like, you can't take them, but you can't not take them and win.
No.
Like, what do startups do? Like, how do startups sort of catch up or not be behind the curve, where they are sort of still, figuring out their product and what problem they're solving and their customer, and they do have, data. They have something that they're working on. How do they avoid just arbitrarily attaching AI, or how do they arbitrarily attach AI in the most best way? Like, how do they figure that out?
Yeah, I actually do think it ties together a few of the things that we talked about. It's a great like summarization because it
That's
first
why John.
requires
That's
you.
why John lets me come back even if
Yeah,
I
yeah.
show up late. It's not my bouncy hands. Yeah.
You bring it home at the end. But I do think that it starts with like this concept of, what problem are you solving? Not with AI, just like in general, what are you doing as a business? What problem do you solve? What are the pain points of your customer? And then aligning that with, okay, how would I do that? How am I going to do that work? And you don't have to include any technology. Just how are you going to solve those pains for your customer? And then I personally now will just ask a model like a GPT 4.0. I'll just be like, hey, these are my customers. These are their pain points. This is their dream outcome. I want to build this product. And then whatever gap I have in my understanding, just ask it for guidance. I always say AI is great, especially in startups and up to 100 million in revenue. It's great at helping the helpers. Like, do not be so interested in building something that you're going to push to your customers or building a model because there's so much risk associated with that. And you could just Google AI gone wrong. And you can see a sea of pioneers with arrows in their backs face down in the dirt. Like, you don't be careful with that. But what can you do is look at what you were going to do with or without AI. I mean, maybe some of you are AI startups, and that's fine. Like, focus on that, but still solve a real problem for a customer and focus on the problem. I always tell people, do not fall in love with the product that you're building. Fall in love with the problem that you are solving and evolve that product as much as necessary. I remember at Amazon, we had this concept called anytime feedback, and it was just a website people could go to and it was literally Reddit. People could just like hammer us with feedback. But it's the best thing because it allowed us our roadmaps for our products were 95% driven by customer feedback. Every sprint, we were doing something that someone was like, this is broken, this doesn't work, or this is what we want. For sometimes as owners, as entrepreneurs, we get distracted and we kind of put in a bunch of stuff. We're like, this would be so cool. But nobody actually needs it. Nobody wants it. Today, we live in a social world where we can have that information at our fingertips. Use AI to amplify that work. Do not build an AI system that's customer facing initially if you can avoid it, unless that's your business. Use it to amplify the workers doing the work. And that's why actually this week we just launched, some of the people that are here know we just launched a new course called Microsoft Copilot Coaching, because about 600,000 people that I'm directly connected to have Copilot in their desktop and have no idea.
Yeah.
They do not know how to use it.
It's
And
right
so
there, the
like,
big button right there.
yeah, like just learn the tools that are in your environment already and use them to amplify what you're doing. And really what that comes down to is just learning to ask good questions. And that is a good skill, whether you're using AI or not.
Totally agree. Yes. If Ty were here, he would definitely double down on, asking good questions. The questions are the answer.
Yes, exactly. Question everything.
Yes. Sometimes twice.
Sometimes.
Do I get Ty's question about prompt engineering now that I already earned a freebie?
You know what? A broken clock tells the right time twice a day. Go ahead.
No, I think
No, go for it.
All right, so
let's
talk about the prompt engineering roles and function.
Yeah, and so this is like my water in the wave comment. I'm a big believer that prompt engineering is another word for good communication skills. And that every role right now, we saw this early adoption of prompt engineers. And at the time, I don't think we really understood that so I used to go into rooms of thousands of people. I'd be like, how many of you have used ChatGPT? And they'd all raise their hand or half of them. And I'd be like, poof, you are a prompt engineer. Congratulations. Go change your LinkedIn. Like, you can make 200 grand more than you're making right now, as a joke. But the reality is like talking to machines is our new normal. No matter where you are on your own personal journey, like that is the new normal. You will no longer have to do what we used to do. I mean, I have so many devices now that have just come out, like the AI pin, I think, right? Like this little doohickey, which is you stick it on and you talk to it all day long. And it's voice activated, generative model backed. And it has a camera for computer vision. I was in front of the movie theater and I just wanted to test it out. I'm like, where am I? And I looked around, took 15 seconds or so and said, "Oh, you're in front of Cinemark movie theater. Here's the address." And I was like, "That's pretty cool." Like, I'm impressed, buddy. So I think the world is, which is good. That means that we're reducing that, barrier to entry, that now you just have to
The
talk.
friction.
Yeah, you just have to talk. But the challenge with that is, again, not everybody's great at human connection, which means they'll be even worse at machine communication. So where I think prompt engineering has evolved to now is more about those people that know how to build AI safety systems, security systems with natural language. And many times they are not going to be your data scientists. They might even be journalists, storytellers, technical marketers. You'd be shocked. But these people know how to craft a message to a model that maybe can evoke a undesired response, which is exactly what I want in my beta testing, right? Like, I want you to ask as many weird things as possible. I just had someone ask my pizza bot that I built recently. It asked my pizza bot if I said I do not offer like real-time services. There's no human behind this bot. So if somebody asks about a human, send them somewhere. Well, they asked this weirdly phrased sentence about, I'd really like to talk to a human, but it embedded it inside of like, my kids are doing this. Like, it's called prompt injection. Like, it was this really vague, weird prompt. And then in the middle, it asked a very clear question that I told the model not to do. And the model was like, "I don't actually understand, but I understand that sentence, so I'm going to answer that." And it was wrong. And so people have to focus, like, how are you going to make sure your model only manages desirable conversations, avoids undesirable conversations, make sure that it has precision in, like we talked about at the beginning, RAG, right? Has precision in where it's retrieving its information, sourcing that data. So prompt engineering, I think, is kind of maybe the highest level of abstraction for the skill set that's required, which is really, how are you going to make sure not only can you prompt a model and get it to do what you want, which everyone will do, but how do I actually build safety? How do I make sure that the model doesn't allow jailbreaks, doesn't allow someone to do prompt injection? Like, it moves more towards a cybersecurity almost kind of role, but it's security, accuracy, fairness. Like, that's why that red team,
Integrity.
integrity. Like, that red team is this holistic, inclusive group of people, and they all care about different stuff. Someone's a security person, someone's an accuracy person, someone's a fairness person, or 4 or 5 of each. But I think that's going to be kind of where we transition, is to this kind of AI red team concept.
I agree. So we can find you where? Nicole or NoelleRussel.ai?
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
I mean, of course, I always encourage listeners to just connect with me on LinkedIn, and don't do the thing like, don't follow. Like, that's so Instagram. Like, definitely go find the little 3 dots, hit connect. Let's be real friends. I keep getting my amount of people that can connect with me in real time increased. So there's still openings. So I'd love to be friends. Send a message, say hello. I have a free upskilling guide of the classes I use to train my team. They're all free classes, but sometimes, I know you both know this, there is a sea of free classes out there. And so I've distilled the ones that worked for me and my team. So happy to share that with anyone who messages me, just as a gift for our new friendship. So thank you. It was awesome. So fun.
Yeah, so cool. So thank you so much for coming on. Again, maybe we'll do this again in a little while, but this has been great for having that conversation about, how do we, again, free the human? How do we, not only relieve pains, but create gains? How do we do it responsibly and ethically? So, again, thank you very much for coming on. This has been great. And that's all we have for this week. So we'll see you next week. Have a good night.